Well, welcome back. For those who've been with us this morning, for those not, I'm Mark Guerin, Director of the Institute of Politics, and we're thrilled to continue these important conversations about the 2020 election. We now turn to the Democratic primary field, and 11 campaigns represented here, and we're very grateful to those managers and senior officials who join us for this conversation. I'll turn it over to our moderators, Yamiche and Alex, who have provided a great deal of focus and dedication to this effort, for which we're grateful. So Yamiche, Alex, thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Alex and I are very, very excited to speak with all of you today and really talk about this wild and important 2020 election cycle. I want to just jump right in. I want to go straight to Shakir and the Bernie Sanders campaign. Talk a little bit about how the senator was thinking about broadening his base, especially when it comes to voters of color, given that that was the thing in 2016 that was decisive. And of course, it was the thing in 2020 that was decisive as well.
Right. Well, so Yamiche, obviously at the outset, we included a more diverse campaign leadership all the way from the top through the bottom. It was a priority for him to ensure that our campaign looked like the supporters of this campaign. That was obviously a learning lesson, and we were benefited by the fact that he had run once before. So in addition to the fact that we had some lessons about how we should structure a campaign, we also had some suggestions about who might support our campaign, how they might support our campaign financially, how many action takers we might have, how many people we could have on an email list. All those things help benefit at the outset, kind of structurally setting this up. And as you say, broadening the base. So we knew that this would be a much more competitive primary with a lot more people in it. And I think the first order priority was to commit those who were already with Bernie last time around to ensure that they stayed with him. And we felt like if we could at least maintain a healthy amount of that, it would give us the time that was required, over the course of the campaign to do the persuasion that would be needed. And time would tell whether we could do that. But if we started with getting the base of the Bernie supporters of last cycle, we knew we'd be in an instantly competitive position, and then hopefully getting to a one-on-one with whomever the other candidate might be, give ourselves a chance of persuasion. Obviously, that one-on-one took a long time and actually never really got there.
And you said time would tell if the strategy worked. He was able to get some more support among Latino voters, but the support of African American voters proved to be decisive. It's why President Biden won. What do you think were the failures there, frankly? And what do you think really made this not work in his favor?
Yeah, in my view, while there was certainly an African American issue there with our lack of support among them. I think it more reflected, in general, the what I would say is an age challenge. Like demographically, we had strong support of people under 40, 45 years old, and that was across all racial ethnic groups. And so when you look at the participation of African American voters in a lot of those states, you had healthy amounts of older African American voters, middle-aged African American voters voting in high rates who were not with Bernie Sanders, were actually with Joe Biden or other candidates. And so to my mind, it was always from the outset an issue of trying to appeal to people who were in the older age bracket. And I think from my estimation, that challenge was always that Bernie Sanders was a unique, iconoclastic president offering an agenda that we haven't seen previously from the president of the United States, offering Medicare for all, free tuition at public colleges, universities, canceling all student debt, et cetera, et cetera. And that, for many people who are middle-aged or older, we often heard it and saw it and felt it, that they thought it was naive, it couldn't be done, it was impossible. And so trying to conquer that age group was the persistent and constant challenge, but it did reflect how we did our advertising strategy. And obviously, we wish we could have done better with them. We did try.
If I could, and maybe it's because I covered Bernie Sanders the most. One quick last question, and you can be brief because I know we have to get to the other candidates. Was there any, Bernie's been on message for so long, but was there any thought of the fact that, okay, this message looks naive to older voters? Is there anything we can do? Or do you kind of lean in on the idea that, okay, our message was not going to work and it was the decision that the candidate made?
Well, we did lean into some of the strengths that we thought were his consistency of issues. And if we felt, in my mind, that the primary was always two major questions. One was, who's the candidate best positioned to defeat Donald Trump, and who's the candidate who most aligns with your values? And we were trying desperately to merge those two conversations to say, if you pick the candidate who not only you feel can defeat Donald Trump, but also best aligns with your values. And we thought that if people ordered the candidates, we would be in the best position to do that. But I think our biggest concern and what bore out over the course of the primary was that the one question, who could best defeat Donald Trump, would be the one that kind of overarching hung over the entire race. And on that one, we were always kind of battling uphill, particularly with Joe Biden on that question. And we did a lot of our advertising around, if you look at some of the stuff we were doing, that was around, John F. Kennedy and other Democratic presidents who had promised universal health care. And this was a continuation of a long line of Democratic presidents who made this commitment, and he was going to come around and do it. We were trying, we're experimenting with different ways, but I would say if I suggest one challenge that we never conquered, what's that 30-second version of why Bernie Sanders was the best to defeat Donald Trump? And we talked about it at length, could never quite hone in because it took a lot of nuance and kind of conversation around challenging a faux populism of Donald Trump and having an elongated conversation, not a 30-second distillation.
And Roger, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, no, I wanted to go to Roger.
Same thought, go ahead.
Right, just sort of, chronologically, I think you were the first to get in the race, right? New Year's Eve, 2018. From the start.
In fairness, I think it was Secretary Castro, but yeah, we were.
Fair enough. But so you get in New Year's Eve, 2018. You're immediately faced with the question of how are you going to be, a leading competitive candidate, given that Bernie Sanders is likely to run again, given that you are perceived anyway as being in broadly similar spaces. Tell us about how you get from New Year's Eve through, I think it's fair to say, a lean first couple months to the point where you feel like you've actually found a place in the race.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, for our campaign and for Senator Warren, from day one, we wanted to run a campaign that was true to her, a campaign that was centered on ideas and people. And specifically, wanting to answer the question is, who does government work for and how do you get the power back into the hands of people? So who does government work for? Who does our economy work for? And who's our democracy work for? I mean, I think we ran a campaign on substance, which is what Elizabeth wanted to do. She wanted to spend the entire year making sure that she was pushing her ideas out there. We put out a lot of detailed plans, went to 31 states and Puerto Rico and places like Kermit, West Virginia to talk about what's broken and how to fix it. We weren't afraid to innovate, and we knew we had to innovate and try different things in order for us to have a lane and win this election. But we centered our campaign on grassroots supporters. We had 1.2 million donors, no high dollar fundraisers. She, I think, didn't invent that notion of selfies, but she certainly systematized it in a way that no one else has done before. 125,000 selfies that we counted. It was fun. We had a great time running the campaign, and at the end of it, it was rooted in, again, ideas. And the fundamental question is, who does government work for? Who does our economy work for? Who does our democracy work for?
Can I ask you just on the
plans out there? Yeah.
Yeah, no, just on the ideas a part of it, right? At what point did you start to believe that was going to be a viable political strategy, as opposed to, this is a high-minded thing that is true to the candidate, right? Because it's not like nobody else in the race had ideas, or that I think traditionally the notion that we have very little money and there are several candidates ahead of us in the polls, let's talk about policy, would not necessarily be the natural place to go.
Yeah, I will be honest. I mean, when we started this campaign, and we knew Elizabeth Warren was just not going to run the way everyone else is going to run. Knowing that she wanted to run without doing high dollar fundraising, knowing that she wanted to run and talk about ideas, because if you're going to run, chances are your odds of winning are 20, 10, 15, I don't know, name your number, but chances are you're going to lose. So do you want to spend a year and a half, running the fundraising circuit around the country, or do you want to talk about the ideas you care about? And she chose to talk about the ideas she cared about. That, combined with no major dollar fundraising program as a campaign manager, was a little frightening, to be honest. But where I first started feeling like, hey, this actually might work, was probably when the senator put out a child care plan, and we sent out an email. This is probably sometime in April, around the CNN town hall. And I think at the time that was our largest fundraising email, and it was about childcare plan. It was about policy. And the next month over, we put out the student loan calculator, and we sent out an email. We had a little after it, and that raised more money than that. So that was probably the first time where I realized, people are paying attention to issues. People are hungry for specifics. And, in the absence of being able to do fundraising the traditional way, that was one way for us to get people excited, get people interested, and get them donating.
Rohini, I'd like to go to you next, and sort of this notion of running a campaign of ideas, talking about sort of thematically what a candidate wants to be about. Can you just take us through the conversation within the Harris campaign and with then Senator Harris about how she wanted to talk about her record on criminal justice and how she wanted to bring her background as a prosecutor into the race? It's obviously something that she's very proud of, obviously something that she felt was going to be politically complicated.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you. And it's good to see everyone on here. Part of those conversations, I think for any of us that are, talking with their candidates, it's about making sure that their ideas are reflected in a way, as Roger said, that's true to them, that feels they can bring their unique lived experience to the table. When it came to criminal justice reform, it's obviously, something that she's worked on her whole career. And part of the conversations were about making sure that people understood the whole context of her career. So that's things like her Back on Track initiative, all the work she had done with families to make sure that they felt that they could advocate properly in the system. And so we talked about how to, amplify those parts of her record, but then also, you could see the impact even continued on in the George Floyd Policing Act that she worked with Senator Booker on. And she was able to then bring her unique lived experience. So some of this stuff continues on. And even now, when we look at some of the ideas that as a campaign that we pushed for in terms of policy, from a larger sense of all her work across the different levels of government, when you look at Black maternal mortality, teacher pay, ideas that we were talking about, paid leave, monthly payments for families that were trying to make ends meet at the end of the month. A lot of those are being now reflected in the Biden-Harris administration. So I think, at the start of it, you don't necessarily know where it's going to go, but a lot of these candidates put their head down and really changed the nature of the conversation of where the Democratic base was. And so you can see a lot of it reflected today, I think, which has been great.
Justin, I want to bring you in. Can you talk a bit about Senator Klobuchar running as a moderate and how much she was thinking about whether or not she was in then former Vice President Biden's shadow in terms of running in the moderate lane? And was there any sort of thought that her ability to win was really going to be tied to whether or not he could effectively run?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Our kind of theory of the case that from the outset was that we needed to have Vice President Biden stumble if we were going to be successful, because their backgrounds kind of aligned so much. I mean, we thought that there was an opportunity for a younger woman version of Joe Biden, someone that got things done, that did well with moderates and with independents, and kind of focused on a record of achievement and getting things done in Washington. We thought that was the best way to take on Donald Trump. We thought that, like Amy had done in Minnesota, if we were going to really get things done in Washington, we needed to win back the House, or win the Senate, keep the House, and add some majorities to actually to accomplish some things. And that's what she had done in Minnesota. So that was kind of all part of our theory. But of course, the vice president and his team did a great job and kind of stayed the course and got stronger as things went along and wedged us out and made the space for us kind of shrink every couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. I want to now focus on Beto and that Vanity Fair cover. Talk to me a little bit about his decision, what regrets he had around that, but also was the sense that this was going to be a sort of tough thing to do in this media landscape with the way he was talking.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a tough decision for him. I think he was a little unique in that he had just come off of a pretty bruising Senate campaign and was kind of immediately thrust into this decision that almost started even before that election was over. So yeah, I think he really had a lot of challenges in, why are you doing this? And, what is your your purpose here, just because, like I said, I don't think, he didn't have like a multi-year plan on doing this. And I think it just, in some ways early on, it certainly showed.
David, can I just follow up on that a little bit? And, I think at the outset of this race, there are a number of candidates who are represented here who were sort of rock stars in the party. I think it'd be fair to say that yours is the one who sort of endured the most abrupt shift from being treated as a rock star to being hazed as like the white privilege guy, the male privilege guy. Can you just talk about what that experience was like? Did you anticipate it? Was it disorienting for him?
Yeah, I think it was a little disorienting. When we launched, even that we didn't, we actually at that point didn't even have a campaign manager. So we were still trying to kind of work through that. And I think if you look at the Senate race and then the presidential, it was really, really abrupt. In some ways, because you're running against, kind of the villain in the Senate with Cruz, he largely got a pass in a lot of ways. I don't think he was really picked on or anything else in that race, just because, who doesn't love to hate Ted Cruz, quite frankly. Pretty much everybody kind of has a thing with Ted Cruz. And then he, when the presidential did certain things he had done, even in the Senate race, he was just getting pummeled for, right? Like where he's, in the back of a pickup truck at early voting stations, and he's, oh wow, look at this guy, he's on a bullhorn and everything else, and then you fast forward, he's in the presidential, like, oh my God, this guy's on a car. It's so ridiculous. So it's just like, or the joke, if you make a joke about raising the kids, where like, oh, that's so fun. I mean, he made that same comment, multiple times. It's just, it's a different lens. And I don't think we totally saw it coming.
Does he ever say to you, like, man, this is total bullshit? Like, does it get under his skin?
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's human. I think it does. He's pretty, pretty sensitive to not being, tone deaf on stuff like that. So I think he took a lot of it to heart. And he's like, in some cases, just like, wow, I kind of deserved it. I didn't really mean it like that, but yeah, I'd say he takes it pretty seriously.
If we want to, I think in some ways we want to talk about the debates and what happens next. And I want to, in some ways, if I can, go to the Castro campaign and talk a bit about the theory of debates, talk a bit about the decision to go after then former Vice President Biden in the way that he did, in the harshness that he did, and whether or not there was any sort of what the thinking was behind that.
Sure, I can start and just kind of talk broadly about how we approach debates. And that was, and I think, a number of the candidates and campaigns who were struggling a little more for attention, didn't come on with a bigger national platform. For a lot of us, I think those debates were this, built-in opportunity for, it's a platform, people are watching, people are finally paying attention. And so the goal was to have a couple of moments that you could sort of walk away with, people would replay, and that it could be sort of that launching pad, right? So every one of those debates really became that opportunity to stand out. And for Julian, standing out was going to be, it's going to be, a sort of a chance to draw contrasts. But he was very adamant that it's always going to be on policy, right? Like he was comfortable drawing a sharp contrast as long as it was about a position on policy. That was how he wanted to run. He wanted to run a substantive campaign. And so, I think you saw that, he would sort of look for those opportunities to say, I'm going to be the one who comes up here and, for example, talks about communities that don't usually get talked about on the stage. Mm-hmm. And, he did that over and over again. I will say the situation with President Biden was genuinely not the way it got sort of treated in the press. It was one of those moments where he saw an opportunity, he saw someone say something and then reverse course and was trying to make that point sort of sharply, right? It was like, no, you just said that. And I think just with the tenor of the conversation, with the fact that people had sort of brought this, brought some of this stuff up before, it landed in a way that was very, very different, because our entire strategy had been he was comfortable being sharp, but only as long as it was about policy. So it was really, that situation was unfortunate, because it was, sort of by the time he got off stage, it was, the narrative had been shaped how it was shaped. But that really was never a part of the strategy that we were talking about. What we consistently looked at those moments to do was to bolster what we saw as one of the biggest strengths, and that was him as the person who was approaching these issues differently, right? So
I would say, was there an oh shoot moment then? Was it when he got off stage, was he like, okay, I need to fix this? Like what was that feeling like in there, Maya?
My feeling was, oh no, we need to fix this, because I immediately am looking at Twitter. I'm seeing how people are playing it. He came off stage and didn't realize, like, he was like, you can't really hear up there. So it's not like he heard a gasp or anything. He didn't get that that's how it was being played out. But sort of at that point, it was sort of, it kind of was where it was. So, moments like that kind of have a life of their own. And there's, so by the time he came off, it was a much more defensive posture than had he in the moment realized how it was coming across.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that was a fatal mistake?
Yes. I mean, I think it was. I think the way it sort of played out, and I wish we had done a better, cleaner job in the moment of trying to, get out there and say, this is what he was saying. And they're, sort of pointing out the actual point he was trying to make, and making clear, because, yeah, I mean, I think it was a huge mistake. And it was a huge mistake if politics aside, that it wasn't what he meant. He would never have, sort of intentionally applied that about somebody he has respect for. So I regret it, as much for that as anything else. I mean, he and I know that's the conversation they've been able to have, but, that was absolutely something I wish had not come across the way that it did.
I want to go to Zach and Mike in succession on the same question, as the guys who I think are associated with, like, the two candidates in this race who went from a position of the greatest obscurity to, coming out of it, considerably in a considerably different place. What's your theory of the debate stage early on? Like, what's your theory of just like being relevant in that conversation without obviously in either case, like going in there to pick a fight?
Right. I guess for us, we have this perspective of never debating before, never even having done a debate prep. So you're coming in with fresh eyes, and Andrew was a debate champion in high school. So that's his definition of debate. And the reality was, if we're all honest with each other, 10 candidates, 12 candidates on that stage in an hour, that's not a debate, y'all. It's fundamentally not. It's more of a reality TV show, which we ended up calling, but everyone's kind of playing a part and talking in sound bites. And you're all trying to have your moment. And for us, it was, how do you stand out? And not only how do you stand out as just in general, but how do you stand out as a serious candidate or on your policies and that sort of thing? So for us, step one was we didn't wear a tie. And apparently that was a thing. That played over a lot better than we ever thought. And then what we really wanted to do. Were there any other cosmetic choices that you considered other than not wearing a tie? Yeah, we played around with various pins, but that was more subtle. Or, I mean, there were some dumb ideas thrown out there too.
No, tell us the dumb ideas, please.
Ridiculous. I want to be clear, Andrew did not approve any of these, but it was like a tie with Trump's face on it, doing something stupid, these were not good ideas, but they were to get people talking. Who's that guy, right? He was joking publicly. He thought the world would say, who is the Asian man standing next to Joe Biden? And he wanted to stand out that way. And I think that was the right move in many ways. For us, it was about calling out the elephant in the room. In order to stand out, if everyone's thinking something, but not talking about it, drawing attention was helpful. So I think in a second debate, he said, I got more news for not wearing a tie than actually my policy and talking about the fourth industrial revolution and automation. which people had a conniption about, but the reality was we had to break through somehow. So the debates, and you guys have all felt this, you don't really have time to get into the substance of real policy. It's an entertainment situation. Trump was the master of it. If you go back, and it's what we did, if you go back and watch the 2016 first debates, he raised his hand to answer a question that wasn't fundamentally true. I think they asked him if he would stay in the race, or if he would concede to the Republican nominee. And he said, if you remember, I think he said, "Sure, I will, but I'm going to win anyway. It doesn't matter." He's like, "Give me the ball." And then from there, like punched away questions and said, "Make America Great Again," and just stole that show. And I think that wasn't a substantive debate. That's not what the Democrats stand for, but it's tough in that format. So how we approached them was do what we could to stand out, win the war of the attention economy, which we all fight in. We're not all competing with just each other's Democrats. You're competing with Netflix. You're competing with Kim Kardashian. You're trying to get voters to care about your candidate in a broader context and not just in a crowded field. So for better or for worse, that's kind of how we looked at it, Alex.
Yeah. And Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Well, I think the first thing is Pete Buttigieg's name ID was very low getting into this race. You know, at Harvard IOP, it's 100%. In real America, it's, 0. So we had to kind of start from scratch. And I think we approached the debates on a few different fronts. I think one was just stylistically, Pete being a young guy like Andrew Yang, and also not being from Washington, not being a governor, a senator, somebody who'd been a secretary, a mayor from the Midwest. And so stylistically, just looking at Pete Buttigieg on a campaign debate stage just looks different. Who's this young guy and what's he talking about? So I think that was really big. He is a policy wonk, and I think we know that. Now he's Secretary Mayor Pete, or whatever you want to call him, and he's naturally a wonky, policy, thoughtful, articulate person. And so we weren't too worried about how he would kind of present himself on those pieces, like on issues, on policy. What we did do is we really pushed him to be more forceful. It's not in his nature to be in your face and, aggressive and all of that. But we all know that you sort of have to have that element when you're debating. And we were all vying to take on, at the end of the day, Donald Trump. And so, when we were doing debate prep, we were really sort of pushing him to find those moments to kind of promote our message, go on offense, be forceful, show that you're kind of in command. And that's kind of how we approached it. The other thing that's actually pretty funny is early on in the debates, like the first couple, we basically said, you have to get PeteForAmerica.com in your comments. And I think we all realized that the first 2 times he did it, I think it was Miami and Detroit, our website crashed. And it's just like, we were coming in like the sheer infrastructure of how small our campaign was with how big the stage was. And we needed him to say that to get donations. Eventually, we obviously strengthened our website and were able to take on more donations. But that was a very real thing very early on for I think many campaigns.
Can I just, before we move on to a more specific question, and first person to the buzzer answers this one. Did anybody ever call up Tom Perez and say, this is so stupid, the qualification standards that you're setting, like you're destroying our campaigns?
We can see the eyes rolling, Maya, by the way.
I see Heather's hand is up.
And I see eyes rolling on Maya.
Yeah, I mean, on the Steyer campaign, it was a constant struggle. As you know, we didn't make the September debate after, announcing in July, and then didn't make the Las Vegas debate at the end of the campaign cycle. And we had multiple conversations with the DNC about the criteria and just somewhat arbitrary nature of the timelines of the polling. It was, these weeks of polling. Also, as I'm sure all the other campaigns can attest, like Nevada and South Carolina are polled significantly less than Iowa and New Hampshire. So if you're a campaign that's doing better in those states, which was the case for us, you just have way less opportunities to,
get in the qualification criteria. So it was definitely a constant conversation with the DNC. I mean, I'll give the DNC credit. Like, this is a impossible decision to make, and they had 20 how many candidates by the end. So I get that it was very difficult, but yeah.
I want to now turn to the hair. Well, I guess Maya, do you want to explain why you were rolling eyes? You want to? We can move on.
No, honestly, Heather, I mean, I think we all, with those criteria were difficult. I share both the frustration and the understanding that the DNC was in an impossible position. But yes, it was very difficult.
Yeah. I want to go to the Harris campaign. Talk about the decision to go after then Vice President Biden, and in particular, why so early, and why that subject, and why that subject out?
Sure. So, I think taking a step back, as everyone's talked about in terms of the debates, the mindset of how we approach debates, I think everybody, me as a person that's come with a policy background, anytime you've 30 seconds to prove, what your policy that you're talking about, how you can show contrast to Donald Trump is not an easy, task. And also, one of the conversations that I'm sure many of the candidate teams had was about how to also bring in your own biographical experience to help the American people understand who you are and all of that. So I know that, the now vice president shared so much about, she often felt a great sense of responsibility and wanted people to see what's possible in America. And that's what this candidacy was about. But she also had, great respect and admiration for, she currently has great respect and admiration for President Biden. And they have a long history together. But during the primary, part of this, was about bringing her unique lived experience to the debate stage. I think for me, I'll just share my own experience. I was 36 weeks pregnant at the time in the Miami heat. And so trying to figure out how to make sure everybody, was on point about their various policies was certainly not an easy task. But I think that, part of this was, again, making sure that she was able to share that experience on stage, and that we were able to, share that and work with the team to, after you go through those kind of debates, then it's immediately into rounds of media interviews and all of that. So, I think even right now, everybody, as they're all still friends, and we're working with many of the same people.
Well, can I just jump in here and she didn't just get up and sort of give a 90-second explanation of her experience as a young woman growing up in Oakland and going to a school that was being integrated, right? So what's the theory of pairing that with an attack, and particularly an attack on Biden's record in the Senate?
Yeah, so I think that the president, as he said as vice president at the time, that he was prepared to be the target of the attacks because he was the front runner, and was surprised by the nature of it. But that's the nature of these campaigns, and everybody moved on from it. So I think that they're still friends to this day, and they're currently working together. But I think that again, taking a step back, what we all went into the debate was with a series of goals, which was, how do we share the policies, that you're trying to share with the American people in a certain period of time? How do you also, share your own experience? And this was an issue that she had personal experience with.
And can I just ask you, on the aftermath of that debate, she obviously spikes in the polls coming right out of it. And then over the next 4 to 6 weeks, that tapers off and then reverses itself. Why do you think that happened?
Well, so that I also remember that month as going into my 37th and 38th week. Sure. I actually ended up giving birth on the day of the second debate. So it was a nice, real part of, I felt very connected to this whole primary. But, this is part of it's just the nature. I think for anyone at being considered at any point in time in the polls, shooting up very quickly, having the additional media scrutiny, I think we all worked through, what it meant at that singular moment in time, and trying to just, the nature of dealing with the media, the complete focus on what can feel a lot of pressure on you at the time to have every answer, and make sure everything is not taken out of context. So I think there's a bunch of people on here that have been, had that feeling of the spotlight, and, and I think that part of it also in the nature of preparing and traveling the country, rallies are getting bigger, conversations are, the schedules are getting tighter. And so a lot of it's just managing the process for campaigns, which can be very exciting, but also very challenging too.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the debates and talking about kind of that. And I wonder if we could also, this might be skipping ahead a bit, but I wonder about the Iowa caucuses, the fiasco of that. Maybe we could start with the Buttigieg campaign about what it means that it gets so obscured.
Yeah, no, thank you, Yamiche. Boy, Iowa, how about that? It was really our strategy, we called it the catapult, that we wanted to really put a lot of our chips on Iowa right out of the gate. And I think that we all sort of realize why, but, candidate kind of coming from obscurity really needs to build their name ID, Midwestern state, not too far from where we are here in Indiana. And we wanted to basically do the strategy that Jimmy Carter did and Barack Obama did, over the years with the caucus system, to kind of come from obscurity to win the caucuses, and then instantly sort of you have all this news coverage, your name ID takes off, you're making all sorts of money, and it allows you to continue through the calendar in a pretty good fashion.
But that, of course, just to say, that didn't happen for him, obviously, because there was this fiasco. The Biden campaign was reported as this is a gift. How mad is in those moments afterwards? Do you have this kind of oh shoot crap person moment where you're like, this was our moment and we're not going to get it?
It's tremendously frustrating. It was our strategy to win Iowa, to then have Pete kind of skyrocket to the front of the pack, and then win in New Hampshire, and then be in stronger footing as we got toward Super Tuesday and beyond. Incredibly frustrating. We had this moment in the campaign where we had to sort of decide, what do we do on caucus night? Results are trickling in, extremely frustrating. Not really sure what the state party is going to do. And so Pete does say, we're victorious. This is the language that he finally ends up using to try to clinch some media attention. The other thing that I've looked back at, Yamiche, that I think is important is throughout this period of time, we don't get the clear win out of Iowa, sort of a split decision with the Sanders campaign. And then immediately everybody looks to New Hampshire. Throughout this whole process, a lot of people who are in the news are still Joe Biden. Can he keep it together? And also Michael Bloomberg with massive spending on TV across the country. So it wasn't like Pete Buttigieg, was getting all this earned media because of the controversy. It was really further kind of drowned out because of everything else that was going on around that time period in early February.
Feds, could you talk about that and Bernie and the aftermath of the Iowa fiasco? Having known Bernie, I can just imagine maybe what his reaction would have been. But what was the reaction to this Iowa fiasco?
Just honestly and candidly, it was just a complete killer. I mean, I wish I could convey just how comfortable that, like, the strategy that we had laid out heading to Iowa. We obviously did a massive amount of spending there, lots of TV ads. We were assuming and hoping for a first place finish. But the most critical things for our campaign was place above Elizabeth Warren's campaign, place above Biden's campaign, right? And so we're heading into Iowa, and it's really important. We want to win the state. We think we're on a good path. If Pete Buttigieg also does very well, in our view, that's good for business. And if he wins Iowa, we play second, that's okay. It would be, if the same thing happens in New Hampshire, that's okay. We're looking good for the long term in our view, if we're getting into a one-on-one with Pete Buttigieg and how this might go down the road. And obviously the most important thing coming out of it is you're going to have the collapse of the front runner, the collapse of Joe Biden. And so instead of that narrative, which I think everyone would have been more honed in on, we lose. We didn't get the fundraising bump out of Iowa that you would expect of a popular vote winner in Iowa, and it was a struggle all the way through New Hampshire. Even in New Hampshire, as Mike can attest, like we were, the storylines of what was going on in Iowa were still dogging us in New Hampshire, and so I can't explain how much it just screwed the whole strategy. That was our shot. That if you look at how we thought we were going to win, it was that Biden would fall. We would position ourselves such that in our minds, a lot of voters were choosing between Bernie and Biden. Who's the best position to candidate to defeat Donald Trump? And as they came off of Biden, they were going to split in a lot of different ways, and they would move. A fair chunk would move towards us, and that ended up bearing out to be true. And so we're set up exactly. In Iowa's cluster just screwed our entire strategy. Especially if you look at how much we spent there and what we were banking on to happen over the next week, it did tremendous damage.
Can I ask, not just Faz actually, can I just ask for a show of hands? Like, has Iowa lost the right to drive the car? Like, is it time to take the car keys away? Because the caucus has outlived their usefulness. Just like put that hand up if it's time.
Absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
we have Maya, Zach, Faz, Roger. We have everybody. Do we have everybody except for Rohini?
I have a funny thing.
I've learned, if anything, we've all learned from the primary campaigns, it's probably let's not go into the raise your hand question.
Too late. We have near unanimity.
Alex, I have a very funny story, and Roger knows this because Roger and I sort of work together. I'm the Indiana Democratic Party chair, which is like obviously the most thankless job in Indiana. But in that capacity, I'm on the DNC. So I actually believe I will be voting on this. So if we want to form a little union here, I'll carry your proxy and we'll go vote together. But anyway, I'll just say that full disclosure, like I'm actually going to have to vote on this. And I do think at the end of the day, I think the caucuses are probably whatever, but there needs to be a mechanism for a long shot to run for president. I think it's the American way. We always have to have a way for somebody to run like a trailblazing campaign and capture the hearts and minds of the American people.
And I guess if I could just really quickly,
yeah.
I mean, obviously there was Barack Obama, who was seen as the long shot who then made it through this system. So that mean that this system, but do you think that as it is, because of the fiasco, that system can't allow for another long shot?
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, and the caucus system's very quirky, as we all know. It's a very, very quirky system. Now, I mean, Zach just experienced it. Sorry, Zach, but ranked choice voting, there's all these different styles of primaries. I've seen other things about regional primaries that the DNC has considered. I think there's so many different ways to not just look at states, like what states go first, and is it a regional or kind of out of the chute? How does that work? But also the style of voting. If it's ranked preference, if it's a primary system, if it's a different type of caucus, there's so much to still look at that I think they're all going to hammer out this year.
I would follow up on Mike's comment just to say I'm on the Rules and Bylaws Committee, and I guess about a year or so ago, maybe two, I simply asked. Obviously, I think most people know I'm from Pennsylvania, so we have our own challenges. But nonetheless, I just asked a question: why are we still having these caucuses? It was an innocent question because I've never experienced it, and you would have thought that I had just asked something that was un-American. I mean, by the time they finished explaining it to me, I just said, "I'm sorry, I withdraw the question." I couldn't take the abuse anymore. I'm just asking the question. They're very serious.
I mean, I would also like to say, like, for a party that talks so much about voter suppression, especially now, to have caucuses where you have to vote at a certain time and there's very limited ways to do absentee voting, I think they do have to work on a system where we actually are getting more people to vote rather than limiting the systems.
5% of the state votes, right?
Yeah, I just want to rewind the tape a little bit to one of the earlier fall debates that, obviously one of the big debate moments of the race was the now president and vice president. That debate in the fall in Ohio, where Senator Warren and then Mayor Pete clash over Medicare for all. I want to ask Roger and Mike to talk about sort of what the theory was going into that debate on both sides. Why did Senator Warren decide to sort of not have a fully fleshed out sense of how to pay for her plan at that point? And why was that the moment that Pete decided he was going to kind of stop being the nice guy?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I guess I would start by saying it wasn't Senator Warren's plan. It was probably one of the few policy areas that she talked about that wasn't her plan. It was obviously Senator Sanders' bill in the Senate, and many of the candidates who wound up running, wound up either co-sponsoring and supporting it. And to Rohini's point about raising hands during debates or panels like this, obviously that was a moment when Senator Warren raised her hand, and very few other people did. That said, look, Medicare for All was a tough position for us and tough position for the senator specifically. We had supporters on both sides of it. We had people who supported Medicare for All and thought it was the most important thing. We had people who supported Bernie Sanders in 2016. We had people who fundamentally, love Elizabeth, respected her on a number of issues, but they supported Hillary Clinton in 2016. So it was always a tough position for us to be in, and not only because of the issue and our base, but also the fact that it wasn't her plan.
Has she ever expressed regret about putting up her hand in that debate? Just feeling like, I really boxed myself in there, and boy, what do I do now?
I mean, fundamentally, it is universal health care, Medicare for All is something she believed in. She had been a co-sponsor of the bill, as it's been well documented. It's who she is, it's where she is on the issue.
And then Mike, the why sort of seek out that confrontation at that time and in that way? Yeah,
I think early on, sort of before so many people jumped in, Medicare for All was popular. I think progressive and the left, and it was just sort of talked about. And I think people staked out, as Roger said, they staked out, okay, if I'm going to run for president, I should probably be just right here, right? And I think what happened over the following months, as more and more people got in there, and as we all engaged voters in the early states and across the country, was that position wasn't as popular as it probably was at the early start of the primary season. And that, at least we saw that majority of Americans, majority of Democrats preferred choices, preferred an option. And so we went down that path, and Pete, did say, the senator has a plan for everything but this, which was a strike. The other thing I think that was happening at this time, Alex, was, Pete's young, he's gay, he's a veteran, he's a mayor, he has all these sort of different tools, but we were still, I think, we had to kind of go down the path of moderation. Bernie is Bernie, Elizabeth is Elizabeth, and they are so powerful and strong right there. We saw Biden as universal name ID, the moderate establishment choice, but we thought early on it was faulty. We thought that over time he would trail down, and then we wanted to be the campaign that was there to sort of pick up the pieces and to be the alternative to perhaps the progressive left if they were battling it out between the two of them. And so that was also kind of a critical juncture at that debate in Ohio when we could make that point.
I'm really interested now in the Warren campaign's decision to go so hard at Mike Bloomberg. It was a defining moment of the debate stage. What was the thinking behind that? Was it pretty clear, okay, he's on stage, so we're going with him, we're focusing on him?
Yeah, I mean, look, everyone here worked really hard campaigning all year. Our bosses worked really hard, going to numerous, fish fries, town halls, whatever events that were happening all around the country, taking terrible flights to get there, sleeping at maybe not the best hotels in the country. That said, we all talked about ideas. We talked about ideas. We talked about plans. We talked about, we didn't necessarily agree on everything, but we spent a lot of time talking about substance. We spent a lot of time working hard. We spent a lot of time organizing. And one of the things, as I said before, that Senator Warren cares about the most is who does our government work for? And related to that is who does our democracy work for? And, she just couldn't have a situation where a billionaire could buy a primary and skip the whole democracy thing. Not just for the cycle, but for the future. That's just not how she believes a party's nominee should be chosen.
Can I ask you, Roger, just to be like maybe slightly more vivid on the conversation about what she was like? Did you know that it was going to be like not just a confrontation, but like two Gatling guns kind of confrontation?
Well, I mean, look, when you're sitting on stage next to each other, it certainly creates a little bit more drama because you don't have to do the split screen side by side. They are side by side. look, I think that everything that she said in that debate was substantive, factual, and accurate.
Can I just ask Mayor Nutter again, just backing up the timeline slightly? Not on the Vegas debate. We'll get your reaction to that. But like his decision to get in the race, he had told you he wasn't running. He had told the Biden folks he wasn't running. You had endorsed Joe Biden, and then he changes his mind. Like, how does that go down, and how tough a position does Mike Bloomberg put you in personally?
Well, thanks for having me. It was certainly it was an unusual situation. I am generally known for, being wherever I am, and that's it. And I would have been with Mike if he had gone, if my memory serves me correctly, I think he was thinking about it in January of 19, and then decided not to. I participated financially, at least, in a fundraiser for vice president, now president. And that was that. The rest of the year went on. As you said, Mike changed his mind. As I indicated, I was always going to be for him. So personally, yeah, it was a bit of a challenge, only because of the circumstances that had happened. But we've known each other for a long, long time and worked very closely together. So I mean, this is not about me. Made the decision. And Mike's theory was he wanted to defeat Donald Trump. So
when do you first get the inkling that actually maybe he is going to do this after all?
Sometime maybe late October, November, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's becoming more of a conversation, but it was not clear. But certainly by the time I think the filing was in Alabama, certainly way before that, it was clear Mike Bloomberg is going.
Mayor Nutter, if I could also ask you, there was instantly the perception that Mayor Bloomberg was going to try to buy his way through this election. Yeah. Did you have conversations with him about that? Did he realize that it was going to be seen as tone deaf in a party that was talking about working class people, or did he just not care about that perception, rather?
He certainly cared, but I mean, to that overall point, I mean, I don't know that there's a campaign represented on this stage. I know we're not together, that didn't spend money.
But this was different.
Everybody spent money. Mike personally, I guess I just have to say it. I mean, he just had a lot of it. So, there's no one on this stage who, if they were in the same situation, wouldn't do the same thing. I mean, it costs a lot of money to run for president of the United States of America. It costs a lot of money to run for governor. It costs a lot of money to run for mayor. So anyone who has resources is going to use them. So, I mean, let's be honest with each other about that. He had what he had. You talked earlier about the DNC rules. We were affected in a different way because we could never meet the fundraising guidelines because Mike doesn't accept money and never has. So that's but that's, if you will, that's a little bit of a self-inflicted problem. There was discussion about doing fundraisers, literally just to be able to get on the stage. But that was, again, his personal decision. So, yes, it was known the perception was going to be somehow he was going to use massive wealth to try to win an election. But again, I'd push back on all my friends here and say, if you had those kind of dollars, you would spend them too. It really costs a lot of money to run. And he thought that even with that, trying to defeat Donald Trump, the most existential threat to democracy in the country, if not on the planet, was worth it to take him out. And so his goal was always focused on, yes, I will get attacked for any number of different things. Defeating Donald Trump is worth it.
Can I just ask you, just to push you a little bit on that?
Sure.
If that's the case, that he has the unlimited resources and he's willing to spend it, and his top goal is defeating
Donald Trump. I don't know if they're unlimited. I mean,
well,
even Mike has
functionally unlimited.
He has a lot. Yeah.
Why didn't he keep his commitment to do a major anti-Trump super PAC in the general election?
Well, we're really jumping way far ahead.
No, I mean, just this, you're sort of, I appreciate the angle that you're taking here, but
right. I think he spent a lot of resources for the general election in a lot of different ways. So, the personal decision about whether to do a super PAC or not slightly above my pay grade, but, we are focused on the primary. And as Democrats, we did defeat Donald Trump. So I think Mike helped in a lot of different ways, the funding to the DNC, literally right after the primary ended, at least for him, as well as significant support to a lot of different organizations and campaigns overall. Again, his goal,
some of which endorsed him subsequently.
Right.
Faz, I want to bring you in here.
His goal was to defeat Donald Trump. I think we accomplished a part of that goal.
Faz, I want to bring you in here. Bloomberg gets in at a point in the race where Senator Sanders is clearly on the upswing, right? He has had his medical episode and he is roaring back. Take us through, from that rally in Queens through the end of November. Is he anticipating that it's going to be him and Biden? Is he anticipating maybe it will end up being me and the billionaire? And how does he feel about that?
You missed the key moment, which was October 1, when he lands in the hospital and has a heart attack.
I just mentioned it, but go ahead.
Like I'm saying, that period much more important than Queens, right? So like that period, it's hard to say like, oh, he thinks he's going to be on the stage with Biden. I mean, at that point, you have to kind of appreciate that. Who knows what the current course of our campaign is once he goes into the hospital. And so from there, we had an ad, I will say on the night before he goes into the hospital, we report quarter 3 earnings in our hall, and we were very proud, and I feel good about. We will surprise a lot of people with having been the candidate who had the highest haul in the quarter 3, which I think many people have figured Bernie was on the fade, because in quarter 2, I think Senator Warren's campaign, which I have a lot of respect for Roger and his whole team, had done particularly well. And so, many people are looking at us fading heading into quarter 3, quarter 4. Now he's in the hospital. So I think that moment, I would say right before he went into the hospital, felt very strong that the things that we had been building towards were always for a quarter 4 push. And I say that because I had a lot of internal pressure during the course of the campaign to spend, especially Senator Warren's campaign was doing a hell of a job kind of building up an operation all across the country. And a lot of people are coming at me saying, hey, you got to build a state director here, you got to build some field staff here, we got to do all these kinds of other things. And I was like, no, we're going to hold resources. And that ended up being the harder thing. And so we go into quarter 3, the night he goes in the hospital, we have a cash on hand of somewhere around, I want to say $33 million. And to me, when I saw, ultimately when everyone reported, and I see basically we're well ahead of where everyone else is, I'm like, that now it's game on, right? So we're sitting in the hospital, and I've got the opportunity, in some ways, a silver lining, because Senator Sanders has to rethink how he can expend his own energies in this course of the campaign. He needs to rely on the people around him in a way that maybe he didn't even have to before October 1. He was a one-person workhorse who would do 6 events a day and go all over the damn place, and he loved to do that. But now it was going to require him to kind of settle into a different kind of a role, and as a result, lean more on a structure that would last us through the next 3 months to get him into a place of hopefully being competitive. And that was not forgiven, because when we were in the hospital, I think it was the first time that the RCP average reflected that Senator Warren, I think, had just moved into first place, eclipsing Joe Biden. And so that was a critical moment. Like, you look at the total race and you want to say, hey, do we have a shot? Well, you could easily argue like might have been done for you right there. And so coming out of that, to your point, Alex, to just quickly move ahead right through it. So, we had to set up, here it is. We're going to have to be the progressive campaign that people believe and give people a sense of that this is the Bernie that they know and love. And they obviously had an opportunity to have a glimpse of a campaign that didn't have him in it. Now, hopefully we come back strong. If he's feeling good and he wants to go, then we go back up with an ad campaign that I just pulled down. We go back up with a series of events, and worked pretty damn hard to get Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and Rashid Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and a bunch of them, and lining them up week after week after week, big events, and really kind of just show the Bernie is back in a big way, in a sense, using that moment when he was potentially not in the race as a reason for galvanizing interest and excitement for the fact that he is back in the race. And
I want to ask, if I could jump in though, I want to ask you about the decision not to reveal the heart attack immediately. What's the thinking behind that? And why did you ultimately decide not to talk about it in the immediate aftermath?
So the words heart attack, I didn't personally know what it was, the diagnosis. So if you track the timeline, he's in Nevada. That night he gets into the hospital. I want to say it's probably 11 p.m. Nevada time, 2 a.m. my time, booking flights, getting on a plane. So I'm in the air starting at 7 a.m. that morning. As diagnoses are coming, we land. I land first sometime around, I don't know, whatever, it was Nevada time. And then Jane, his wife, lands shortly after. So the first thing was we weren't going to do anything until Jane was good. And the reason was we are often, I know a lot of people don't always appreciate it, but like we're trying to talk to his family, close loved ones, talk to the campaign next, and then talk to the public after that. And so I want to make sure we know what the hell we're saying. And quite frankly, you can imagine all of our campaign staff, right? What happened to him? I don't know, and so I don't get a chance to talk to his doctor until maybe like 30 minutes before Jane does. Jane comes in. She obviously wants to talk to the doctor. And until that's all done, which ends up taking to the midday of the next day, Yamiche, then we have a sense of, okay, here's what we think we know has happened. And even on the quote unquote heart attack, those of you, I don't know if any of you have gone through the period, there's a myocardial infarction. Right. Well, what the hell is a myocardial? Well, some people refer to it as a heart attack. Some people don't refer to it as heart attack. So we're having an internal debate with trying to consult with doctors at this point now, the next day, like, what is a myocardial infarction? What do we need to say? How do we say it? Okay, we'll just say it. So we just said myocardial infarction as the thing that we just said, because we are having such a deliberation around what is the right language to use.
Mm-hmm. I want to, if I could turn a little bit to the other campaigns, I want to bring you and Maya. Talk a little bit about when it was clear that President Biden was going to be able to retain control of a diverse group of Democrats. Congressman Castro, I should say, Julian Castro, Congressman Castro, he was running on this idea as a former head secretary. He was running on this idea of being the voice of the left. I talked to so many activists who said, yes, he's speaking our language, but still, it was clear that Joe Biden was holding on to Black voters. When did you realize that was happening, and what did you think about it?
Well, we knew our message was resonating with folks who were sort of super engaged in, sort of who were the activists, right? Like those are the people we knew we were sort of reaching, people were hearing about. But we knew that in order to translate that to regular people who are maybe paying attention, maybe not as much, our name ID was going to have to go up significantly. We knew that sort of talking about these issues was going to help us immensely with, sort of folks that we hoped could be messengers in a lot of those communities and help us to get something out. But we knew that, sort of continuing to poll, in the low single digits, continuing to struggle for fundraising was going to get in the way of folks genuinely sort of coming over. Because I think one of the toughest things about specifically talking to communities that have been underrepresented is they are some of the most sophisticated voters, because so many of these issues are not academic. They're not, these are the things that people are dealing with every single day. And so people have a very high level of sophistication around, all right, who is going to be the best for my community? Who can actually win? And that calculus was always going to hurt us from sort of getting the numbers that we wanted. Our theory of the case was that there was sort of hidden support. Folks who were hearing about Julian Castro, liked the way he talked about issues, were really excited about him, but were like, if he can't win, I'm not going to expend a vote. So that if we could just get our numbers up some, that they could grow from there, that we would be able to, once people started seeing, because we had such a big field, getting 5% was like, oh, wow, you're off to the races. Like, we felt like if we could get sort of to that so that people were like, oh, wow, he's growing. What we would see is that there were some people who were there was some hidden support that was out there. It was like, I like him. And as soon as I get the impression he could go somewhere, I'm with him. And I think what we saw is just continuing to struggle to prove to those communities who most needed that assurance that it wasn't going to be a thrown away vote, that he could win. And so I feel like while we weren't able to do that, I definitely still sort of walk away from that for folks who want to run that kind of campaign to really focus on more marginalized communities. I would say don't be discouraged by low early numbers, because you are trying to win over of the most sophisticated voters that we have in the party.
I just want to go back to Mayor Nutter and then a quick question for Faz before we hit Super Tuesday. Mayor Nutter, I feel like mid-January, Iowa and New Hampshire have come and gone. That to me is what I recall as the moment when it seems like the path is opening pretty significantly. for Mayor Bloomberg, right? Tell us about what the theory of the case is in the moment where it does seem like Biden is taking a dive. And was the theory always like, we're going to have to go 50 states with Bernie at this point?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I think as everyone knows, Mike ran a whole lot of ads. None of them were against any Democrats, and it was all focused on Donald Trump. Second, I think it was you, Alex, you had asked a couple different managers about those matchups. And I think the path was somewhere between Senator Sanders and Vice President Biden. There was no particularly clear front runner still, even at that point. And so it was, I think, a very narrow path for us. It was a national strategy. Mike Bloomberg tried basically to run a national campaign during the primary election of 2020. Very different, kind of strategy, obviously. And when you get in that late, again, maybe slightly self-inflicted, but it is what it is, you have to do things differently. He wasn't even on the ballot, as I'm sure everyone recalls, in those places, but was going to places where at the time, most Democrats were not going. It was about the Electoral College. We know, of course, the tragedy of 2016 is, you need to, there are two races going on. You need to win the Electoral College to become the next president of the United States of America. And so a lot of the focus was on Electoral College rich places. Democrats generally were not in those places, but Donald Trump was. And so, again, utilizing resources, whether in the primary or, I just want to mention, Alex, we can talk about the general. I mean, you did miss the $100 million down to Florida that Mike did put in, and a number of other places, but we're not talking about the general election. So the path was narrow. It was into and through Electoral College rich states. Yeah. And $275 million of anti-Trump ads that basically had nothing to do with Mike, and trying to set the stage for his defeat one way or the other. Okay.
Faz, Nevada, just real fast, because then we do want to get to Super Tuesday. It's just a massive blowout for you. Is there, what is the thinking in that moment, in as concise a fashion as possible, for how to then pivot to, you have obviously retained your base from 2016 and expanded it significantly in that state. How do you go much bigger? How do you compete in a place like South Carolina?
So we obviously made huge investments in organizing in all of the early 4 states. So as we were transitioning, and the hard part with South Carolina is it was 4 days before Super Tuesday, which 14 states would vote. So you're always dealing with a budget crunch of okay, every dollar that goes in South Carolina is coming away from Virginia or Massachusetts or somewhere else, right? In a place, Texas, California, huge states. So in retrospect, it's easier to say, oh, we'll take like 100,000 there and move it from California, move it into South Carolina. But at the time, you think you're doing grave damage to your campaign to say, hey, 4 days later, we're gonna have this massive Super Tuesday. So one is making sure in the reallocation of staff, which took up, I can't even tell you how much time, but reallocation of staff to all of these states and just dissemination of advertising. We are thinking about, we're competing for Super Tuesday now. And obviously South Carolina is important, but it probably played a larger set of importance than we assumed. I would also say that the day after the Nevada caucus, we put Senator Sanders on an interview in 60 minutes. And there was an attempt to ensure that he was speaking as potentially a President Sanders to the nation, speaking particularly to elderly voters who we identified as probably the core set of concern, and say, okay, here he is. Now you're going to hear him. And we felt really good about the interview. There was one part of it that obviously dogged us the entire week, which was the topic of Fidel Castro came up, and so that was not obviously the topic. If there's one thing I could have changed, we would have kind of started to roll out the fact that we were talking about a woman for vice president and having that conversation instead. But hindsight's 2020.
Yep. And then hopefully with equal concision, Mike, Justin, David. You all converge on Biden on the eve of Super Tuesday. For each of your candidates, tell us how it happens.
Well, I can go first. For us, it was, I guess, Sunday night before the Super Tuesday. Amy was flying from Minnesota to Colorado. She had been in Selma with, I think, all the other candidates that day in church, and been thinking about what she was going to do post Super Tuesday. We just got out of the field that said we were going to win in Minnesota. And we thought we'd do well and pick up delegates in a handful of other states. And she called me when they landed about 1:30 in the morning, saying that she had decided she wanted to get out, wanted to endorse Biden before the Super Tuesday votes to try to be helpful to him. Didn't think that there was any value in winning Minnesota, kind of taking a victory lap and then getting out of the race. And so I texted Anita, I think at 2:30 in the morning to see if she was awake. She called me at 5. We had to Google search to see where the vice president was going to be that day. And then we kind of got to work to set up the Dallas event. We had media traveling with us in a separate plane, so we had to keep our itinerary to try to kind of keep it under wraps, and diverted planes and flew to Dallas.
Great. David?
Yeah, similar. Although I guess we didn't make a decision until Monday, and a similar scramble as far as calling and, where is he going to be, would he be interested in Beto going? And at that point he was obviously out of the race and a private citizen, so it was also flying out of El Paso. I'm like, hey, where's Southwest Airlines? When did they fly out today? Because I think we identified that we had a couple hour window, ironically, just to even go and appear. So originally he was not going to endorse. He had decided to stay out of it. But then, there was a mad scramble the day he did.
Yeah, and I would just add to what everybody said. We felt really strong coming out of the gate. We sort of felt like we did first place, then second place, then third place, then fourth place, and we're just sort of fading. And we didn't really have the resources or feel like we would hit those thresholds, 15%, to continue on. And so Pete made the decision to endorse Biden. We flew down. Well, actually, one funny thing that's actually happened before that, the next morning after South Carolina, Pete has breakfast with Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter's like, "Great, good to see you. So you dropping out?" Like right to his face. And Pete's like, well, okay, So that happened very, very shortly after that. But we flew down, actually pretty poignant. It's just myself and Pete. We flew to Dallas. We had started the campaign together and we wanted to end it together. It was a really sort of emotional moment. It was at a chicken joint in Dallas before the rally with Amy and Beto. And Biden, said that Pete reminded him of his son, Bo. And I think everybody in that moment was very emotional. So it was a really poignant moment to the campaign. And it felt fitting. It felt right to kind of hand it off that way.
Heather, I want to bring you in. Can you talk a little bit about the last stand for Tom Steyer in South Carolina? And one of the most memorable things I think of is his Juvenile Back That Thing Up concert. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, yeah, it was the last stand for us. He had been doing best in South Carolina across the board and doing well with African-American voters. And we felt that if Biden wasn't able to hold on, that it was our chance to do well there. And obviously it was the state that we ended up doing the best in, but not enough to continue. And honestly, I think that concert was just Tom finally letting loose and knowing it was over and just showing that, he had fun with the whole process. And I cringe every time I see it, to be honest. So it's not something I like to talk about.
Why do you cringe?
Oh, that was a very emotional night, obviously, for me and the staff, but I don't know, seeing your candidate be themselves in that way was just like, oh, I can't handle this at this time. There's too much going on. So, it was something Tom had a good time, and that's what mattered.
And Fitz, I want to come to you, Senator Sanders, Bernie. It then becomes a race about him and President Biden. What was the thinking about how far to go? And I remember in 2016 when he was getting hammered for going too far, was there any thought or those echoes of those in the campaign and conversations about that, about making sure that there's enough unity? Or was it just, we're going to go until we possibly can't go? Talk a little bit about the decision making there.
Yamiche, I can't speak to 16 because I wasn't with him, but I was with him the entire way through. We had a great kind of camaraderie, trust, and respect on this one. And so I know where he was on this time. And I will say we had a clear strategy. COVID was starting to hit, obviously, as you all know. And so, right up until then, we had March 10th. March 10th was we decided to throw all eggs in on Michigan. And so, we went hard in Michigan. And I remember getting on the flight, and we were the first campaign to cancel a rally due to COVID. We were going to head to Cleveland that night. We canceled it. We're heading to Vermont instead. Burlington, which ends up being essentially forever. And we, on that flight, he turns to me and says, how do you think we're going to do here? And I was like, well, we put it all in, so I know we could surprise some people. He's like, you know some friends over there in the Biden world, right? And I was like, yeah, why don't you reach out to them? And so, we had a conversation, and I was like, Senator, what do you want me to reach out to him about? And he goes, just ask them what role they see for progressives in their campaign on policy and personnel. And I was like, okay, Senator, I'll come back to you in here. And so I reached out to Ron and Anita, I think probably a day or two right after that. So that starts the clock on March 11th or 12th, somewhere around then. And what ends up, we have a really wonderful kind of conversation ongoing, and knowing at the beginning that there's no expectations of where this might land. But I say this because it gives you a sense of where Bernie's head was at. I mean, he's already thinking about, okay, this probably isn't heading our direction. I'd like to hear where Biden sees a role for me /us /people who supported this campaign. And let's have that out. And it landed, well, it takes a little while for the conversation to materialize, particularly in COVID, and particularly when he's a senator trying to deal with COVID legislation. So it took probably a little bit longer than we would have ordinarily wanted, but then we wrap it up. And I think the endorsement comes in late, or maybe the first week of April, I believe, something like that. And the task forces along with it on various issues that we did. So from my perspective, it was always like, from that flight, I knew where he was at. I know what the chatter was out in the world about him, but I knew where he was at and what my job was, and bringing the worlds together.
Can you bring us into what it felt like for him to end the campaign? He really obviously cared about running. He had this whole base. I wonder if at all you could talk a little bit about, maybe it's the hurt, maybe it's just how he talked about this. I know it wasn't specifically about him. He's always said it's not me, it's we, but it still must have been personally tough for him.
I think he does feel this sense of people expect me to fight for them. And you feel it, like people expect me to, in a sense, say the things that other people won't say, push the things that other people won't push, and to raise issues around working class justifiable grievances, issues with corporate accountability and corporate power. And so I think in his mind, he's like, am I letting them all down if I don't find a way to demonstrate to them that there is a phase 2 to this, or there's a next phase to this? And I think that really governs the conversations with the Biden crew, because all he's seeking is, what can I tell our supporters? And obviously, to his credit, Biden, he announces he's going to reduce the Medicare eligibility age down to 60. He starts working on community college plans. We work on a bunch of issue-based task forces. In his mind, for Senator Sanders, I think it was just like, how are we going to communicate to millions and millions of people the existential threat that Donald Trump poses, and that Biden ends up being the best hope for how we defeat him? And so really I see him searching for weeks over weeks over weeks, kind of like in conversation with his wife, Jane, and us, like what can we suggest to them? And President Obama gets wrapped into some of these conversations. What can we suggest to them? How can we demonstrate to our supporters? Because you don't want to suggest that the supporters are just theyey're going to vote for Biden. That's where I think his head was at. They're not just going to vote for Biden. We have to do some work to make sure that they feel that it is the vote that they rightfully should cast.
Okay, we have like 90 seconds here, and I want to get 2 questions into this. So real fast, Roger, when did your camp establish that sort of line of communication with Biden?
Probably shortly after Super Tuesday dropped out. We established that line with both Senator Sanders and Faz and the then Vice President's staff.
Okay, and Rohini, I'm going to end with you. What is your first recollection of then Senator Harris indicating, like, whatever, like maybe I'd be up for one last job?
So just, to back up all the way to that, I want to say February before Super Tuesday and all of that, the only person the vice president, even would entertain directly talking about just an endorsement in general was President Biden. But the thing that was weighing on her mind was, her colleagues in the race, and particularly, her female colleagues with Senator Warren still in the race and her having a personal friendship. After that, series of weeks, they started announcing co-chairs for, this vice presidential process. And Anita was our really the point person for a lot of the questions people had, like, how would this go? And I mean, at the end of the day, I think that, all the credit goes to President Biden for making a historic choice with her selection. And there was a number of extraordinary women in the running and friends and allies. And we continue on with many of those women and working with them. And, the senator at the time was really trying to just make sure that, I do think amidst all of the process, even back and forth with the Biden campaign at the time, we had, a number of things that was just figuring out how to get as many votes as possible for Joe Biden at the time, and doing everything we can to build a schedule amidst her senator duties that would literally put her and her supporters in a place that they, everybody felt. And I will say so many of the campaigns did this, how to take your supporters and make sure that they're doing everything they can to get Donald Trump out of office and to get President Biden elected. And so that's how we sort of had those conversations and talked with everyone about that.
I just ask you before Mark jumps in, and like real fast, was there even a split second where she was like, man, I am tired. I just ran a campaign. Like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm ready to have this conversation yet.
I think every candidate has had those conversations where they just really need a break. COVID, I will say, was certainly a very reflective moment on that. And I do think that, for a lot of these, particularly the ones that were in the Senate and had to go back to the Senate, I think seeing all your colleagues after you have just been on the campaign trail is it's a tough thing to do. And particularly for her, we knew the historic nature of the campaign and what a great responsibility she always felt she had in where, similar to what Vi's talked about, was where do we bring our supporters? Where do we put them towards? But I do think that, the stakes were so high for all of us here with with Donald Trump in office. And if you remember that time, every week he was still doing something to make us all remember what was at stake. And so that was also a big rallying effort for all of us to just do everything we can for, then Vice President Biden. And I think that the all of the candidates out there, there was you have to remember, I mean, we were all, so many of us were friends, we're all still working together now. And so I think that, it was a really great journey, albeit, with the existential threat we had in that president at the time.
Mark?
Well, thank you. We'll leave it there, Rahini, with the last word. One of the hallmarks of the Institute of Politics is the student voice. So I'm going to call for us Manat Banassi and Aristotle. We have two questions for our great panel. Manat.
Thanks so much, Mark. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your insights. It's been really lovely to have you here today. My question is around young people. I'd love to hear a little bit more about young people. So, of course, we saw such incredible turnout this cycle. And I'm curious, how did you strategize around this new energy and momentum and so many people wanted to be involved with the political process? And any specific, maybe fun stories or tactics you used around young people?
Mark, would you like me to bundle?
Sure. Yeah. Why don't you go ahead? Let's bundle it, Aristotle. Go ahead.
Great. Thanks for being with us, campaign managers. My question is about those candidates who are or who were simultaneously in public office when they ran for president. So maybe this is best for Warren team, Sanders team, anyone, others. How did they choose to balance that continued responsibility with the effort for running for president? What was your strategy there? And if I could tack on, how did it affect dynamics at their day job in Congress? Did their colleagues view them with less favor? Were they less favorably viewed? Did they see them with more status? How do you think that played out?
So we have two questions. Manat's on the youth vote, and then Aristotle's on the sitting senators relationship vote. We'll open it up.
I can go first. Yeah, one of the best, most exciting parts of the campaign cycle was working with young people. And, part of it is just wanting to work with young people, wanting to listen to them, wanting them to be part of the process. I think that the young people of America, that's going to be the future of the Democratic Party in this country. I'm probably definitely not a millennial, and I probably have to admit that I'm a Gen Xer. But making sure that we're hiring people who are Gen Zers, made a huge difference in just how we thought about things I never imagined before. It also made me realize that the next time we have this panel, we're probably going to have a panel of campaign managers that, despite the talented group of people we have here, we're going to have probably people who are more digital first, who are going to be more adept at tools, think about things and data in a different way. But I would say probably a thing that probably was not strategic, but it just worked out the way it was in terms of outreach to young people, was the pinky promises that Senator Warren did during the selfie lines. It's thousands of young women and girls and young men that she engaged with. And it was the best part of the campaign. And seeing people like you who want to be part of this is incredibly encouraging and inspiring.
Yeah, we had tons of young people working on the campaign, but also I think Mike, and I know all the other candidates, the extensive use of every possible social media platform, said in so many meetings where I was like seriously the old person in the room, and still learning about new forms and ways of communicating with people that I had never heard of in my life, but learned a lot during the campaign from the young people on the Bloomberg campaign.
I'll jump in on the doing the two jobs at once, or two things at once question. It was a real challenge for us. Amy wanted to be in DC, particularly for important votes, and so she spent probably a little more time than I would have liked in Washington. And it was particularly difficult during the impeachment trial, right? It was for those of us that were in the Senate to have to be in DC right before the Iowa caucuses was really a challenge, and I think it lost us some momentum. I think one day she got done early. We flew her out to Western Iowa and did some events and flew her back the same night. But that is, that was something that was important to Amy, though, was to still be true to the constituents in Minnesota and doing her job in Washington, as well as trying to run for president.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, the vice president was always very concerned. She was on the Senate Intelligence Committee at the time, and that was certainly a challenge. I think I that I was her Senate chief also for a portion of this, and there did seem to be a very big, the cadre of the group that was running for president. There was also a lot of friendship. You could see them on the floor. Most of the time they were talking about when do they think the votes would end? When could they get on a flight? When could they get to the airport? And so that was always, kind of push and pull with, and it was a constant conversations with now Leader Schumer about, when can they get back to Iowa or South Carolina or wherever they were going. So it wasn't easy, but I do think many of the Senate colleagues, I think there was a really big deal of, camaraderie in doing it together and just understanding how hard it was. So I would definitely, at least with the vice president, she would come back with a lot of different stories about, one person's trip or another person's trip. And so that was just a very nice part of it. And just to your second question about young people, I think everyone, I do think that the fact that so many candidates ran for office really helped all of us bring in a new crop of talent, more diverse talent from the top to the bottom. I know the vice president was very interested in making sure she had a campaign that looked like America. And we had people that showed up with it was like fathers with their daughters and sons. And, so there was a very history-making nature about so many people running and the ideas that they ran on. And young people, were put in positions that normally they may not have if there was only one candidate in the race. So in many ways, I think this whole crop created a whole pipeline of talent that has been, that people got picked up by the Biden campaign and the general election. They're now working, many of them are working in the administration and doing big things. So I think there's a lot more to come from it.
We obviously had a campaign that benefited from tremendous support from young people. And while we suffered maybe from some older people thinking Bernie Sanders was naive, we benefited from younger people seeing a moral clarity and a moral vision of the world we deserve in Bernie Sanders, someone with a high degree of authenticity and consistency on these matters. And so we leaned into it on a variety of fronts. And if you think about the digital, no slight on anybody, I think our digital kind of crushed the field on so many ways. We invested earlier on live streaming everywhere he went. We were on Instagram very early, crushing it with TikTok very early. If you look at Twitch, I think first candidate maybe in a significant way on Twitch, utilizing that platform, doing quite well on them. So not only platforms, but I think even in animating the campaign, going across the border from Michigan into Canada to get prescription drugs, going to the Lion's Den and Walmart, we were trying to figure out ways to just like show an energy, show a kind of a grassroots organizer in chief. That young people would get excited about seeing a different kind of a president. So animating that during the course of the campaign, finding the different modes by which to do it. The sadness is that while young people did participate well, if they had participated at a higher rate on Super Tuesday, March 3rd or March 10th, we would have done quite well. And obviously, we didn't see quite the upticks we had hoped on those primary dates. On the in-office question, I know Roger and Justin know this and feel this, which is like there was one particular moment where it impacted us most. And that was the impeachment trial in January. And so we all of our respective bosses are really sitting in an impeachment trial in January that in my mind, it's funny because in some sense I was like, Pete was really one of the major beneficiaries of this whole thing because he's running around the state and doing a tremendous amount of events. And as it ends up winning, I think doing well in some rural parts of that state because he's able to get out there and talk to him. And I know my own assessment was that Justin's candidate, Amy Klobuchar, would have done quite well if she could have had an opportunity to get out there and just couldn't do it. And so it actually ended up kind of icing the race in a way, and we felt strong heading into January in Iowa. And I think, we were obviously worried about the strength of Elizabeth Warren's campaign coming back. And I think it kind of iced it in a way where it made it harder for them to kind of gain traction because she was in impeachment trial, we're in impeachment trial. And so in some ways it might have also benefited, but it also kind of, we saw how it was benefiting Pete, and we would have loved the opportunity to kind of get out into the rural parts where we thought we could have done quite well.
Yeah. Thanks for those two great questions, and thanks to our panelists for your service on the campaigns and for all the candor that you brought to this conversation. We thank you most sincerely, of course, to Yamiche and Alex for expertly moderating this session and the previous one. These sessions are embargoed until the Institute of Politics will release the proceedings towards the end of the summer in order to preserve the kind of process parts that we've done in preparation for the book. So we thank you for that. This webinar will now end. So for those invited back as participants or observers to the next session, you can log back into the same Zoom link for the 12:45 start. So thank you very, very much. We're excited to have this session. Yamiche and Alex are unending thanks for taking on this very complicated, busy time and really doing it so well. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you all.